The Glasgow Azure User Group was founded in early 2017, as you can see, by Sarah Lean, who's obviously the organizer, and she usually does this, but she's asked me to do it tonight. So apologies for any hiccups and stuff like that. I'll probably drop the ball, so apologies. So let's move on. So yeah, Sarah Lean and Gregor, that's the two of us. So you can find us on Twitter. Don't need too many festive friend eggs. Yeah. So code of conduct. So everyone needs to be friendly and patient. Try and be welcoming. We're a very friendly bunch, as you'll find out if you've just joined us for the first time. Please be considerate to all the speakers. Please stay on mute if you can. We'll probably take questions at the end, but we'll put that up to the speakers. So if they want to take questions during, that's fine. And also please be respectful. So please be respectful of the speakers during their time doing the talks. Okay, so a huge big thank you to our sponsors who are as follows. We have Servant. Des is on from Servant. Des is the director of the Glasgow-based Servant company. Servant helped many customers move to the cloud, including advanced workloads, SAP, Oracle on Azure, VDI on Azure, etc. We've also got F5, and they deal with app security, traffic management, moving to the cloud, automation and orchestration. We have Shape and Nginx are also part of F5. We also have sponsors the Incremental Group. The Incremental Group deal with cloud and apps, data and AI, and are a leading Microsoft Dynamics partner. And they've got offices right next to, in fact, they host our Azure User Group when we have it in person. So thanks to them. And last but not least, we have Hayes Recruitment, who are recruitment experts. And if you're looking for a new role, please do check out Hayes and see what jobs are available. Our sponsors make it possible for the in-person venues, the food and drink that we have, the pizzas and the beers and the juices. So thank you very much to every one of them. And hopefully we'll return soon with an in-person event, hopefully soon. So tonight's agenda, so we're going to start now. We're going to introduce Tricia Sinclair. Tricia's going to be talking to us tonight about Azure boards, the other side of DevOps. After that, Barbara Forbes, she's going to be talking about automating Azure and making the portal work for you. Then we're going to have a small break, a roundtable chat. So we'll do a bit of chat, a bit of networking, talk shop, things like that, and some virtual drinks. And then to finish up, we've got a Kahoot quiz that Sarah set up. And tonight's prize is I can't even remember the name of the webcam, but tonight's prize is a webcam. So that's going to be good fun. So stay around for that, please. And with that, I shall pass over to Tricia.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to try and just share my PowerPoint deck with you guys. One sec.
Yep, can see that.
Okay, and just so I can keep my notes. One sec. Okay, grand. Cool. Can you hear me and can you see the deck?
Yeah, we can hear you and see that.
Okay, grand. So, hi everyone. So my name's Tricia Sinclair, and I am a pre-sales architect from DXC Technology. I blog mainly about Azure DevOps boards, and this presentation is all about Azure DevOps boards. So thank you so much for having me. Just to kind of introduce what I'm actually going to be talking about in this session today. It's why exactly am I talking about Azure boards? The reason I talk about Azure boards is when people think of Azure DevOps, they tend to think of pipelines. I don't think that module needs any introduction. That's a module that's used to create like your automated build deployments, automated tests, etc. But to me, that's only one part of the story. To really and truly realize the benefits of ADO, we really need to start from Azure DevOps boards. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide an overview of the different modules that are available within Azure DevOps before diving into Azure DevOps boards. I'm going to actually do some demonstrations by going into my team project to show a few of the key features before sharing some of the tools and the techniques that I've actually found useful in my time. During the presentation, if you've got any questions, please put it in the chat, and what I can do is I can respond at the end. I've kind of tried to save around 5 to 10 minutes for any questions at the end. Cool. So if you've ever heard of Azure DevOps, if you've heard of any of these products, you've actually heard of Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps historically started its life as an on-premise application called Visual Studio 2005 Team System. That was an on-premise version. In true Microsoft fashion, the name changed, the functionality grew, and now what we have is the latest iteration of that product, now known as Azure DevOps. So if you've used any of these, you're pretty much using a grandfather or father of Azure DevOps. The latest on-premise version of this is Azure DevOps Server. Okay, so don't feel bad if you're like, what's Azure DevOps? It's literally the same thing, just renamed. Okay, so let's actually go into what exactly DevOps is, because in order to understand what Azure DevOps is used for in reality and how it can be used, we first of all need to understand what exactly DevOps is. And I like this definition. This definition was coined by Donovan Brown from Microsoft. And it was, the terms in this definition was deliberately chosen because of the meaning behind it. For example, value was chosen over software because end users rate success. If changes are actually made, if changes are actually made, then it will, and it only positively affects like the delivery team or the Q&A team or the product team, then where is the value in that? The value needs to be defined by the customer itself. So value over software. Not only that, but DevOps is actually a process. It's not automating software to make things go faster. It's really about people following a process enabled by a product to deliver value to the different stakeholders or the different customers. And with this in mind, then the product of choice to deliver and enable our DevOps process is Azure DevOps. And with this, Azure DevOps has several modules, which then each cater to different purposes. And I'm going to be talking about each of those modules next and explaining where they actually fit within this DevOps process. So Azure boards. This is what we're actually, here to talk about in this session. We're going to go into a little bit more detail later on. This really allows us to have more insights into a project. So in my past in delivery, it's kind of, I used to have to sit with a project manager to kind of update them on where we are with the project. One of my colleagues basically likened it to pulling teeth. Basically having to give updates when you've got other stuff you need to do. So if you're actually having to do that, then to be honest, you really should be utilizing Azure boards, because this is where you're able to get that full traceability and transparency, which stakeholders and project managers really sure appreciate. This is where you can trace that requirement through from inception to build in a way that provides and inspires confidence. Not only that, but this allows stakeholders to kind of be a part of the process by providing feedback based on requirements that are being developed or have been developed. It's that feedback process is a slightly underused tool, which I'm going to aim to show you as well today. Then we've also got Azure repos. Now, repos really provides that source control and collaboration area of Azure DevOps. And this basically allows us to integrate the pipeline module to allow that continuous integration development. And also has the features that will enhance quality by allowing your code reviews and your check-in policies. That's where this is all kept, Azure repos. And this is also where we're defining if you're using, for example, Git or TFVC, Team Foundation Version Control. So that's the Azure Repos module. Then you've also got Azure Pipelines, which, to be honest, I'm not going to go into because I feel like it needs no introduction. This is really the star of Azure DevOps. It's your automated test, automated deployment, release, etc. And we've got so many, presentations about that. We've also then got Azure Artifacts. So if we're actually building, then what we tend to do is actually pulls other components in from different packages, for example, NuGet or other package managers. And for example, if one of those package managers went down, then this will affect your deployments, because if your deployments are pulling it directly from online and that's not working, then that's going to put you at a standstill. What Azure Artifacts allows us to do is actually isolate our development and deployments from issues like this. This can also be incorporated into the builds using pipelines. And then last but not least, but also one of my favorite modules, second favorite module, is Azure Test Plans. So with Azure Test Plans, this basically covers the various types of testing, from your environmental testing or your exploratory testing to your manual testing, and then it can be extended further to include automated testing as well. And this really ties right back into Azure Board to provide that necessary traceability to a requirement. So for example, when a defect has been identified. And then this also has your standard reports, which are super useful for stakeholders, which can define, for example, what was tested, what is being tested, and what the test failure rate is, for example, past what's been passed, etc. Okay, so with all of this, as you can see, it's actually covered the entire software development lifecycle. And that's basically with one or more of those Azure DevOps modules. But the module that's really vital for that full traceability is Azure Boards. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about each of the main features of Azure DevOps Board. And then I'm going to go into Azure DevOps for each of these features to kind of talk about it a little bit more and show what that actually looks like in the system. Please don't forget, if you've got any questions during the demo, please just pop it in the chat. We'll talk about it at the end. Cool. So work items. So work items really just allows us to track the features and the requirements that are being developed. The types of work items, for example, are your code check-ins, your shelf sets, your defects or bugs, your requirements, product backlog items, or user stories. These are all examples of work items. Okay, so one of the main things when you start a project is, of course, you need to import work items. You need to import your requirements so you know exactly what you need to build. What I'm going to show you is 3 of the main ways in which we can get those work items into the system. The first way that I'll talk about is leveraging. The first way I'm going to talk about is known as the Team Explorer plugin. Now with the Team Explorer plugin, if I just get that to start, there you go. So what the Team Explorer plugin does is this allows integration with Excel that you can kind of leverage something that you're already familiar with. A lot of the times when you're gathering requirements, one of the main things everyone uses is Excel. So why not continue using Excel and then just basically leverage the Team Explorer add-in to ensure that not only you're getting the requirements or user stories into ADO, but ensuring that you're pre-validating what you're sending. So what you'll see is me adding the necessary columns. You'll be able to see that we are able to see what fields are required. So when we get it into ADO, it's not a surprise that it's going to fail because we have missing fields which we've not populated. Also, you'll see here that it's pulled through values. So for example, you've got different types of fields against a work item, and that's going to be pulled through to the to the Excel plugin. Not only that, as you add your resources, your users, that's also available to be selected in Excel as well. So basically pre-validating that what you're going to be publishing or creating from Excel into ADO will actually work. So this is different from the CSV import, which does not have this validation, and it will fail if you've got, for example, you've put in resources or users that doesn't exist in the system. It will fail. This provides that validation before you import, so it removes the likeliness of failure. So when we actually go in, you'll see that this has created a user story, and this is also linked to that Excel document, so we can actually just keep pushing changes made from ADO and seeing it in Excel. You can actually obviously do your pivot tables or your charts if you're familiar and you like to use Excel. You can continue using Excel, but actually publish the changes right back into ADO. So that's one way of getting it into the system. Another way is actually leveraging what I would call Power Automate flow. So what Power Automate has is a connector for Azure DevOps. And how I leverage this connector is when we had PSA, which is no longer sold, it's now Project Operations. But when that was being sold, we had a flow that would be triggered based upon the update of a particular field against a project. Now, within project operation, within PSA, Project Services Automation, you're able to have like your milestones, your resources, your tasks, and basically we can identify these and with the connector, which to be honest isn't extremely well documented. So if this is something you are interested in, please let me know. And what I'll be able to do is actually send you the information of how the syntax works to push data in and pull data in using that connector. But as you can see, by updating this field, what's now happening is that flow is going to run. And if I refresh this the screen in ADO, the requirements will actually be populated, linked to the tasks, and be associated to the resources that I had specified within within PSA as well. Okay, so that's another way in which we can actually get data into the system. Now, obviously, because it's a project, because it's a Power Automate connector, there are other ways in which that could be leveraged. For example, a Power App or any other external system that you might be using. If you want to interact with that, it's just, you know, an example. Okay, now the third thing, which is actually one of the more newer pieces of functionality, is basically a GitHub action. So with the GitHub action, what this is doing is this, when we create an issue within GitHub, this is going to trigger a workflow that we've created to send data or send the issue to ADO as a new user story. So you can actually specify how you want the work item to be created. Do you want it to be a user story or a requirement or a product backlog item? And also it will you can specify what states it should be associated to. So when we've created the issue and the workflow has run, then what you'll see is similar to what had happened with Excel and the PSA using the Project Power Automate connector, that the user story rather, will be created successfully. But unlike the others, the information that's being pulled through is not as detailed. So we're not really seeing, okay, it's assigned to this person in GitHub and therefore it's assigned to this person. That information doesn't come through. It's really just a high level that this issue was created and it's been pulled through from GitHub. So it just really allows you to kind of still use Git as you want to and have a bit more traceability within Azure DevOps to know what's going on. Of course, you can also pull, associate like your pull requests, your pushes from here as well, so you can actually see what's happening in Git directly from a work item. And that in itself is also another work item. Now, the final thing that is on this list, but I'm not going to demonstrate, is LCS. Now, LCS is more geared towards D365 finance and supply chain, but you are able to integrate that LCS with Azure DevOps and create requirements or even test cases directly from LCS or the business process modeler, as it's really known. So as you're going through and you're validating that this is the journey that the customer wants, at the end of confirming that, you can actually send that information to Azure DevOps so everyone has that full visibility. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next part, and then this is basically where I'm going to start going into the system. So yay, you're going to actually see ADO. So boards, the main board that we have in ADO is the Kanban board. This is where we're able to collaborate with others by kind of adding and reviewing the work items as cards. So I'm going to basically demonstrate how we're able to pretty much manage our work items, manage our day-to-day with the use of the board. So if I just minimize my screen, and what I'll do is I'll just share. 1 second. So I'm now going to share my desktop and just basically go through some of the main features that are available in ADO. Okay, so here we have the Azure DevOps board. Now with Azure DevOps board, you'll notice that we have like the different stages at the top. So we've got propose, active, resolve, close. Now these are actually standard, but you can actually tweak the stages as you want to. But the beauty about this board is really because it's a one-stop shop, allowing you to kind of see what the requirements are, the stage of the requirements, but also the tasks that are associated to each requirement as well. From here, you can add additional tasks. You can mark the tasks off. And also, if I enabled it, you can also, from this board, also add test cases as well. Okay, now you can tweak the board to kind of at a glance see, but based on color coding, the state of it. So for example, these requirements are not actually in scope, therefore they shouldn't actually be on the board at all. They shouldn't even be proposed. Why are they there? So as a project manager or someone who's functional reviewing this, I know exactly what needs to be done. If something is blocked, I can also have color coding that's gonna kind of highlight it and draw it to my attention. So that provides me with that focus, right? Not only that, but you can also see the swim lanes. So if you're actually working on like different types of requirements and you need to group them together, you can group those requirements using the swim lanes, and that allows people to kind of drag and drop and provide, again, that key focus so you draw your attention to where you need to. So as I mentioned before, this is blocked, so I need to deal with this, and it's also placed in the blocked swim lane as well, so I know what I need to focus on there. Okay, now one of the things within each delivery team you might actually have is the concept of a definition of done. This kind of defines what does it mean to move to the next stage? What needs to be accomplished before I actually say that, yeah, everything is done and now it's no longer considered active, it's considered resolved or closed. Well, when I was in delivery, leading a team, one of the main things that my juniors would tell me is, oh, I didn't know, or I don't actually know how to define that. So the beauty about it is Azure DevOps has a really good place where you can actually put the definition of done, and therefore there is no confusion, there is no question, everyone is on the same wavelength and understanding as to what it means by done. And then on top of that, you also have the concept of making sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew, right? So if you're working on like 3 different requirements at the same time, that actually might be enough for your team. Your team might only be able to handle those 3 work items or 3 requirements. So what you can do is you can actually put your work in progress limits there as well. So right now, our team is actually maxed and way oversubscribed. They're currently working on 7 work items at the moment, but to be honest, in actual fact, we know they can only deal with 3, so you can understand why they might be struggling. Okay. So these are some of the main features that are available on this on the board. So what I next want to do is actually go into the backlog. So the next feature being the backlog, which is also one of my favorite features as well of this. If you're actually working on an agile project or a Scrum project, and I'll go into this, but Azure DevOps does have different what you'd call processes. And two of those align to an agile methodology. With that, you kind of have an idea as to how many work items or how many user stories, product backlog items your team can manage in each sprint. That's known as your velocity. Now, for the initial sprint, you might actually need to estimate what the velocity will be. So if I said, yeah, we can manage 10 story points per sprint right now, because that's what I know. But what's actually going to happen as you go through each sprint, ADO is going to calculate your velocity for you, so you know how much you're truly working on as your sprints go on, right? So for the first one, we'll say 10. Now, why am I saying the velocity is important? And why am I even talking about this? Well, because what this is going to do is, along with two other criteria that I'll talk about, this is then going to define what your sprints can be or what requirements will go into your sprint. Now, of course, not sure if this really happens anymore, but what should really happen, so I'm going to say it's happened, is this should be owned by your product owner. Your product owner is the one that's basically coming in here to add their product backlog items or user stories to kind of order the product backlog items in terms of their business needs, right? Then you've got the sprint team that's basically, the Scrum team that's basically specifying the effort. So they basically have their meeting and they define, okay, this is the effort that we have for each requirement or for each product backlog item or user story. That effort could be done by like your planning poker or your, or any other permutation that you choose. We tend to use planning poker. But with that, those three items, that is how we define what will end up in each sprint. Okay, so if I basically reordered this, so you can actually change the move to position, and I say I want to move this to position 10 because it's not as important. So you'll see that that's now moved to position 10, which basically means that sprint 3 will only have these 3 items here. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing that's actually relatively new, but also relatively useful, is one of the things that was always really complained about in the past is, how do you know how much effort, how much work you've actually got left and seeing it roll up to your requirements? Because obviously what you'll probably do is you'll add tasks to your user stories or your product backlog items or your requirements. So how do you know where you stand? How do you know how much work you've actually got, how much effort's been assigned? Well, now you've got the opportunity to add like roll-up columns. So for example, I've added some of the remaining work and also added a progress column to see where we are with those work items. So if I went to column options, this is where you'll be able to do that. So if I add a roll-up column, I can add it from a quick list, or I could configure a custom roll-up column. So if you've got a field where you're adding your calculations separately, you can actually add that custom roll-up using that. And you can progress by these standard fields, or actually have these different counts. Okay. So that's the product backlog. So the next thing that I want to talk about is being able to use queries. Now, queries is quite important within Azure boards because a lot of what we talked about actually uses queries behind the scenes. So when we imported requirements into ADO using Excel, one of the main things that it will ask for if you're going to push information out to ADO and have a bidirectional integration with Excel, it's going to ask for a query. Now, that will either be a shared query, which means that someone with permissions has shared it with you and the team, or you can create your own personal queries if you've been given permission to. Okay, so depending on the type of query, if it's a flat list, you'll only be able to see the type of work item. So if I created a flat list query that just has product backlog items, I can only just see product backlog items. However, if I created a tree query, then what's going to happen is it will look like this, where I get to see the product backlog items and the associated work items that are also associated to that main item as well. This is really useful if you wanted to import not only requirements, but also associated tasks into ADO. Okay, and also these requirements, these queries are also used on dashboards, on wiki pages. So they're actually just really useful in general, just to have an overview. If you had other projects, other team projects within your ADO organization, then what you're able to also do is query across all the different projects. So for example, being able to see anything that might be overrunning, or anything that not overrunning, anything that might be worked on although it's not approved across general, so kind of anything that's at risk across all the projects, that's something that you can do within here as well. The next thing that I'll talk about is the sprint backlog. So with the sprint backlog, it's a different view to what I showed earlier. So earlier I showed just the backlogs, but what I wanted to focus on here is really the ability to specify your capacity. So when you start a project, there are a couple of things that you will know. You'll have an idea as to what type of resources you need, what they're going to be doing, and also how much time they've got to work on it, right? And also, ideally, hopefully, any holiday they might have. So this is where you set that. You specify the capacity, you specify their days off, you have the resources, you have the type of work that they're going to be doing. So for example, I might be doing both analysis and development. Although it says my name twice, it's two totally different accounts, so please ignore it. I don't have as a lot of accounts readily available, but it just gives you that idea. So pretend this was someone else's name, but that person has also development and test. What this is going to do is it's going to calculate the capacity per day for each person. And roll that up so you're able to then see it across that backlog. So for development, with the amount of resources that we have, with the capacity that they have, we know we have 21 hours available to us. But against the tasks that have been created, that have got the assigned discipline of development, we've only got 15 hours of work. Okay, so vice versa for testing, we don't have anyone assigned for reviewing, and we have 3 hours available for us for analysis. But the beauty about this is, although it's not an exact science, it gives a good indication before you actually start going into your project plans to dig out any detailed work that you need. Because remember, ADO is not a project management tool, it is a supplement to it. Okay, so don't treat it and throw away your project plan. You still need it. This is just to supplement it. It's a bridge between all the resources that you've got on the project, so everyone has an overview of what's going on. Okay, so here you can see that Tricia's overworked. She's only got 9 hours available to her, but she's got 14 hours of work available to her. But development basically says we've got development resources. So we know we can actually, it's fine, we can do the development. We just need to assign work away from Tricia to someone else who's also tasked to do delivery, or development rather. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about is how we can manage and how we can help other people. So if you're going to join a new project, right? And when you join that new project, One of the main things is you've got a lot of material that you need to read. You're not really sure as to what each requirement is for because you haven't really got the story. This is where I use wikis. So wiki typically is like, when I used to use wikis, it was always in SharePoint, but that's been brought over to Azure DevOps, and it's just as quick and easy to set up. And it also has version control behind it as well. So imagine someone new to a project being able to basically look at the wiki to understand what the process, what the journey of the work that you're doing is. And the reason I basically say look at the wiki is because this is then going to be associated to 3 different work items. Okay, not 3 different work items, but as many work items as you need it to be. But it's associated to the work items that process is also related to. So within this AML process, we can see that these are the requirements that are going to be affected by this process. If any of those requirements changes, then the story here will also likely to change, which basically means that all of those will probably be affected. So it's really good to get that visibility and transparency, but also just help onboard people when they've just started. Also, you can follow. So if you are working on this, then you might want to follow your wiki page. So if there are any changes, you can be notified. So you're always updated with any process changes or any changes that might affect a work item that you're working on. Okay. Another reason that you might actually use the wiki is this one of my colleagues does. He basically uses it to kind of have a living, breathing project status update, because as I mentioned, one reason that you might use a query is to kind of embed it within a wiki. So here we've actually got your status card. So this kind of gives you what the current states are for the work items that you've got. So 10 proposed, 7 active, resolved and closed. So you have a high level of where you stand. You've also got the query. So if you had a query, for example, of work items that are blocked, work items that are currently in progress, work items that need additional information, you can actually have all of that here. So you can actually tell more of a story as to what's going on with the actual project, right? You're also able to mention people as well. So if you're basically trying to drag the attention of someone towards the wiki, or to be honest, this can also be done against a work item as well, using the @ similar to when you're actually mentioning someone in Teams or on Outlook. You can @ them and they will be notified if they've got their email associated to ADO. You've also got the ability to also mention work items as well. So, for example, specifying which work items might be out of scope and why, that can be done. And then also have task lists. So, when you're actually deploying something, you might actually want to make sure that everyone is following a particular task list. So you kind of put those task lists in a wiki so everyone knows these are the steps that we go through for these reasons. And then, of course, your discussion area. So your discussion area is quite key. Again, version controls. I can't mention how many times at the start of the project, everything's great, everything's hunky-dory. And at the end of the project, 2 years, 3 years after, when things change throughout the life cycle of a project. People leave, their scope is changed, and it's important to make sure that you have one area where all of this information is kept, because at least then at the end of 2 years, 3 years, you can go back and see what actually happened. Remember the traceability and transparency, because you don't want someone saying this is what we expected when no, they actually changed the scope like a year into the project. So it's really important to keep everything updated in the history of your work items, and also, if necessary, in like your wikis or your other areas in ADO. So I talked about, keeping your customers on board. One of the things and one of the ways in which to do that is, as you're going through your requirements, then if your requirement is ready to be tested, you might want to get some feedback from them. So if I actually go to, let's say, this requirement here, one of the ways in which you can gather feedback is by leveraging what's known as the feedback client. So for this, what I can just do is go to the requirement and request feedback. Feedback can be requested to stakeholders, to basic members, or to fully fledged ADO licensed users. They just need to be a user inside of ADO. Okay, so if I basically put in my name, for example, and put in the instructions as to how to test this. So example of how to test, by the way, I'm not the most imaginative person in the world. Okay, so I want to preview this. This is what it's going to look like. So when I send this, that's what it's going to look like. But in true Blueprinter moment, I've actually created one before. So this is what that customer will get if you request feedback from them. So they will then be able to click on the provide feedback option. And what this will then do is this will initiate what's known as the test and feedback extension. So this test and feedback extension, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to restart that extension because I think I left one running from earlier and I don't want to mix it up. So I'm going to click on provide feedback again. It's going to go and initiate a new session using the test and feedback extension. That is a Chrome extension. Now, it used to only be available in Chrome. Now it's available in Edge as well. That was my email from ADO coming in. So you can now leverage this in Chrome and Edge. What you'll see is that the requirement has been automatically associated. So it now knows what we're testing, okay? But what's going to happen is if I go to, for example, let's say BBC, so I'll put it UK, not Gmail, because it's going to go into my email and I don't want that. But it's going to go onto Gmail. What it's doing is it's taking a note of what I'm doing, what I'm clicking on, you know, where I'm actually going on the screen. So if I went to home or news, for example, and then just went here, when I create a bug or a test case from this area, it knows what's been clicked on. So it's going to really help me to streamline my test cases, you know, the test steps to go through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do with the test and feedback extension. So if I basically want to take a picture, because that's one of the main things, you want to prove that this error that actually did, you know, happen. So if I just take a snip of that, for example, save this. So that's now going to be associated to my instance. So here you can see that that's now, you know, saved against it, right? You can also make notes. So I like this feature, but I would have the font bigger. This will be saved against the response that I'm actually getting for that requirement. If you wanted to, you can also record the screen because of course sometimes you have intermittent issues, so something might happen, but it happens intermittently. The best way to provide proof of that, or you know, confirmation of this is actually happening, is to record the screen, right? And then also, if you wanted to, or if you needed to, you can also create a bug, or you can retrospectively create a test case. So for example, if I created a bug, that's going to pull all the information together that we use. So remember when I mentioned it's taking a note of what I clicked on. So I know I went to BBC, we clicked on home, we clicked on news, we took a picture, and I made a note. So I can basically create a bug saying the font should be bigger. So this is really now where it's going to come down to your team, depending on who's triaging those defects, to basically say yes, it's a bug, or no, it's not a bug. It's a change request, or actually we'll just add it into the sprint if you're actually doing agile. Okay. So this is where you can actually see what it's linked to. And yeah, I can then end that session. When I end that session, if I've got other requirements to go through, I can do the same and just click, just keep repeating. You don't need to have a session, a requirement associated to initiate the feedback request. This can actually be done as an exploratory test thing as well. So if you already just have the test and feedback extension and you wanted your customer to just provide feedback using, for example, a UAT environment, just go through the system, just make sure you're happy, then what they can do is they can actually just run the extension, and as they're running through the extension, they can be providing feedback, unsolicited feedback as they go through. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things that I also want to show you. Now, this is basically where we can, how am I for time? Okay, so this is a couple of things where you can extend the functionality of ADO. One of the things that when I used ADO religiously, because I was in delivery, I struggled with was being able to see which work items were grouped together. Because you have different ways of associating. You can associate requirements as child requirements or child work items, predecessors to a work item, or just related. But how do you tell? Well, what you can do is you've got what's known as the marketplace, which is quite similar to the marketplace in Azure or the marketplace in D365. What I did was I downloaded what's known as the visualizer. So a visualizer it basically allows me to visualize the different work items and just basically toggle it and play with it. Okay, so if I just do top to bottom to change it, but here I can actually see what's a predecessor, what's a child, what's the parent, and just basically drag and drop it to kind of make more sense of what's actually associated. Okay, I can also filter it, or I can just leave it as is. So you do have a lot of functionality and flexibility there. Okay. Another thing as well that I wanted to show is the final thing actually I wanted to show was the dashboard. Now, with the dashboard, this is pretty much where I'm able to group all the information together. You can actually have different dashboards based upon your team. You can also have dashboards that are associated to a security role to make sure that, you know, if you have one that should just be visible for your development team or for your stakeholders, that's also possible. But it's really useful to have a dashboard because it just keeps that focus and keeps everyone aligned to information that they need to know. So for example, how many builds are failing, how many requirements are still pending on additional information, out of scope, that are being worked on, at risk, what's the burn down completion rate, how much scope has been increased, you know, and this is all stuff that's being identified by ADO to kind of help you run your projects. I talked about requirements and the feedback earlier, but if you had multiple feedback requests, then what you could also do is you could leverage this request feedback item here. And what this will do is this will allow you to add multiple feedback requests to that requirement, or to that, multiple feedback requests within the system. The difference between this and what we did was that will associate it directly to a requirement, whereas this will not associate the feedback request to a requirement. You will have to do that manually. So that's the difference. And this will also allow you to do bulk feedback requests if you've got multiple things that they need to check as well. Okay, so that actually brings me to the end of what I wanted to show. Are there any questions?
Yes, Tricia, there is. See, when you were showing the demo project within the wiki.
Yes.
How do you do that? Can you show us how you go about that?
So this demo project here.
Yeah. See how you've got the list of items on the right. How do you add that?
So basically, if I just quickly add a new wiki page here, right? So this is going to be a new wiki page. Now, when you're adding the wiki page, you can actually bring in these multiple different ways. So if you wanted to mention, remember I talked about mentioning a work item, inserting a file, mermaid diagram, you can also bring in query results. So if I bring in a query result, what it's going to ask me is, which query do I want? I want the out of scope requirements. So this is why I'm saying it's queries, very important, because a query is basically, you're going to use that query in so many different ways in so many different areas. It's really as simple as that. It's, yeah.
Okay, one last question I think I have from William is, anyone know of any good way to visualize workloads, progress across multiple teams? It kind of focuses on a single team at the minute. Is there a way to...
Yeah. So there is one thing that I should have shown you, but I just didn't get it set up. It's known as plans. So plans is also something that you can get from the marketplace, but I'm not sure if they've started to introduce it because it is written by Microsoft, it's provided by Microsoft, but it was previously available in marketplace. So I'll show you what I've got, but bear in mind it's not fully set up for you. So if you've got other different, like multiple work streams, then what you can actually do here, or to be honest, multiple work streams or even different team projects, because you can actually go across team projects similar to the query extensions. But you'll be able to, each team project or each work stream might actually operate in a different sprint, in a different cycle. This really just allows you to see what the dates are that everyone is working towards. Does that make sense? And actually see what requirements are associated to each, and then also see the milestones that each are working towards as well.
Okay.
Does that help, or did you mean something else?
William, do you want to come off mute and ask, or does that answer your question?
Kind of, I've seen that one before. It's more, we're using Jira just now, which is a bit more flexible in that we can actually run multiple teams and we can see everything all on basically the one screen. So you've got multiple sprints that all run, and they've obviously got the concept of closing and opening sprints, which is slightly different from boards as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an appetite to potentially move to boards. It's just to see if there is compatible functionality or something that's compatible. We've got something like 10 development teams that are all working on different things at the same time. Mm-hmm. So people do need to get a high level overview of what's going on.
Yeah, so this is basically where you would do that. You've also got Power BI as well, which is what we actually at DXC use. So obviously we have different projects that are being run. They're being run for different team projects or DevOps organizations, to be honest. But what we're able to do is, with the Power BI connector, put that layer of management on top of it, so we can actually group to get an overview of where we stand with each of those projects. Cool. Then if you want, if you also wanted it, if it's already within that organization and you were only concerned about just that organization, what you could do is you could actually create your own dashboards, because of course, if you create your query and you're querying it across the different, if I go back to query, actually, if you're querying against the different projects, because this basically means I don't care about the project that I'm in now. I want to query across the entire team project space, right? Yeah. And then you can leverage this and put this on a dashboard or put this on a wiki and tell your own story.
Okay, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we've got one last question. So this is from Andreas. Do you want to come off mute and ask, Andreas?
Hello. Yeah. So you mentioned that it's best to replace project management tools. I'm thinking of Trello, my favorite, rather than replace them. But are there any times when you wouldn't use it? For example, I'm not working in a team currently, or if the team's too small, or if it's just one person, or are there any other situations where you definitely wouldn't use ADO?
No. The thing is, ADO, like the way it's been set up is you can do as simple, as minimal as you want or as you need, or as complicated and enterprise level as you need. So I didn't actually talk about it, but the four main processes, it started out with Agile, Scrum, CMMI, which is like your more waterfall level, and Yeah, and then I think last year it was introduced Basic. Basic is like the simplest process that's available with an ADO. And that is pretty much, if it was just me and it was a very short project, I'll probably use Basic. It literally just has to do, doing, done. And it's an issue and a bug. That's it.
Excellent. That's great. Good to know. Thank you.
I know someone who actually did their wedding plans in Azure DevOps. No joke.
That's awesome.
No joke. They did their wedding plan in Azure DevOps. Yeah, it was a really good wedding though.
Okay, I think that's us, Tricia. I think we're out of questions. Thank you very much for your session.
Thank you
we would
very
give you-
much.
We would give you a virtual round of applause, but most people are on mute. Yeah. Okay, do we want to take a couple of minute break and then start again, or do we want to just keep going? What do we think? Just keep going. There we go. Yeah, we'll just keep going. Okay, cool. Right, so next up we have Barbara Forbes, and Barbara's going to be talking to us about automating Azure and making the portal work for you. So welcome, Barbara. Stage is yours.
Hi. All right, before I get started, I should apologize for really terrible lighting here because the light is dead and I changed the bulb and it hasn't been fixed. So now I'm out. So that's a weekend project now. And well, let's hope the presentation is more interesting than my face and you won't even notice it. All right. So let me start the PowerPoint. All right, there we go. So we're gonna talk Azure automation, making the portal work for you. So in this case, I'm gonna assume that you already know a bit about Azure. So you know your way around the resources. You've created resources, you've got your infrastructure set up, you've been working with the portal, and now it's time to start automating stuff. And I want to consider how you can get started with that and how you can make that portal work for you, because there are a lot of tips and tricks that come from the portal where you can use the experience that you already have. I forgot to set my timer. Yeah. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Barbara Forbes, and maybe for this crowd, I should explain the combination of my last name and the Dutch accent. My roots are in Scotland. That's where the name comes from. My grandfather was born in Scotland, actually, and he moved to England, and my grandmother was English. And my father was born in England, and he came to the Netherlands for work, and he met my mother, and he never left. So my mother was full-on Dutch. And that's how this combination happened. And I have to tell people how to pronounce my name every day. So I always like it when I'm in another crowd where I do not have to tell people how they have to pronounce Forbes. Anyway, so that's how that happened. I am an IT consultant working in the Netherlands at SCCT, and I am a Microsoft certified trainer and an MVP in the Azure category. I write a weblog on Azure and automation. It's at Forbes with a 4.nl. And my Twitter handle is BA4BES, and that is also my GitHub handle. So a little bit of an agenda for today. We're going to go through some different tools where you can work on automating Azure, the PowerShell, Azure CLI, the Cloud Shell, and we'll end up with ARM templates. What I want to do is just roll around these tools. I'm just going to open a prompt, do some demos with them, and give you some tips and tricks on how to get started and how that portal can help you out with them. Now, first, I want to do a little bit of theory on what we are actually doing, which is infrastructure as code. And this sounds a bit more cool than automating stuff. to say we're doing infrastructure as code. But we are actually doing that because we are creating resources, we are managing resources, and we are deleting resources, and then you're doing infrastructure as code. And there are two different kinds of infra as code, which is imperative and declarative. We will see both of them today. And the imperative one is where you describe the path that needs to be taken to reach a certain goal. So let's say you want to create a resource, then you would describe all the steps that are needed to get to that resource. And the end result is that that resource is created. When you're talking declarative infrastructure as code, you describe that end result. So if you're deploying a resource, you describe what the resource should look like. And the program takes care of the way to get there. You don't have to care about that. You just describe this is what we're going to have in the end. So that's a good thing to see a bit of the difference between those two. And another thing I want to mention is the categories that are available in Azure. And I'm going to open up my browser real quickly. Did the one? Yeah. Because this is the first place where the portal comes in handy. So I have the basic Azure portal here. And if I open the hamburger menu here and move to all services, here I can get an overview of all the categories that store all the different kind of resources that Azure has available. So if I go to compute, for example, I will find virtual machines, but also serverless options as function apps and Kubernetes and stuff like that. All things that would fall under category compute. Well, if I move to networking, I would find network resources like virtual networks, but also public IPs and application gateways. And these categories can help you get a bit of structure in all the different possibilities. If you move in the portal through these categories, you will also find there are a lot of resources in Azure. There are a lot of different things available. I think it's about 200, all of them, I would guess. And these categories, you will see them in one way or another in all the different kinds of automation that we can use. It's not completely consistent. There are some differences in there. It's not all completely the same as this, and you do not have to memorize this. There's no need for that, but it can help you to keep a bit of track of what am I actually doing. So I'll keep that in mind and get back to that later. And let's move on quickly to the first tool that we have available, which is PowerShell. Now, if you have some kind of Windows administration background, there is a big chance you are familiar with PowerShell and you have used it at one time or another. PowerShell is necessary for some Windows Server operations. There are some things you cannot do in a GUI, so that can help you get that first look with it. And for Azure, you can make use of the AZ module. And I have to mention, there's also the Azure RM module, but that is a legacy module. AZ took over from Azure RM, and I think at this point you can do everything in AZ that you could previously do in Azure RM. And there's no development in Azure RM, so you shouldn't use that at all. The AZ module is an open source module. It's available on GitHub. You can create issues in there, so you can keep track that way. You can just install it from the PowerShell gallery with install module AZ. And I'll show you what it all looks like in a second. Now I'm going to show you how to log in to Azure first, because you need to connect. And that's the only thing where I have created a little video, because there are so many email addresses in the frame that I did have to do some blurring. So you would open your PowerShell window and select Connect AZ account. As you see, it has autocomplete. And what it does, it tells you to open a web browser and use that code you see over there and the URL with device login in there. So I open a browser here and I paste the code in here. I select next and it asks me to select one of the accounts that I've been using. And I have been signed in with these accounts, so I do not have to authenticate again. And this is basically it. So now I am signed in. Do not have to worry about anything anymore. They're moving even further where there is just a pop-up menu. You do not even have to use a browser. Oh wait, yeah. But that shows you can log in pretty easily, and there is no issue with using multi-factor authentication or conditional access or any kind of security issues, security measures like that. You can use them all without any issues. So what does this look like in real time? I have run one commandlet already because it takes some time to load. I have used get installed module AZ to get all the modules that are installed on your computer as soon as you install the AZ module. Now this might not be exactly this might not be the exact modules you get if you install the AZ module, because I use this a lot, and as you can see, I have a preview for this one, for example. So sometimes I install some more. But as you can see, this is quite a big list. It's a quite large module. It does take some time to install because of that. And if you look closely, you might find some of these categories that we talked about earlier. So here I see the compute category. And let's see, yeah, here is that network category we talked about. It's not completely consistent. For example, there is a separate functions category, while in the portal that falls under compute. But it can help to get a bit of overview of these categories and the fact that they exist here. When you're using PowerShell, you do not have to worry about them too much because all of these functions are actually just loaded for you. And one module I want to mention is the Azure AD module is actually completely separate from the AZ module. So you can install separately, but you connect separately from it, and they basically have nothing to do with each other except for the word Azure somewhere in there. So we're not going to talk the Azure AD module, but it is nice to know that it's there. Let me just clean that screen. Now, when we're working with PowerShell, every PowerShell commandlet consists of a verb and a noun. So basically, first define what you want to do. Do you want to get something? Do you want to change something? Do you want to create something? Want to delete something? And after that, you define what you want to do it to. And with some autocomplete, it's actually easy to guess some of, it's possible to guess what some of these commandlets are. So the first task I want to do is I want to get a list of all the resource groups. So I would use the verb get, because that makes sense. And all the commandlets start with AZ. And for a resource group, PowerShell is often writes it all out. So resource group, I start with this and then I put autocomplete there. And it autocompletes to AZ resource, which is close, but it was not what I wanted. I wanted a group. Let's put a G in there, autocomplete again. Hey, there we go. This looks promising. Now this one doesn't need any parameters, so I can just press enter. And here I get a list of the resource groups in my subscription. So that's a good starting point, and it came out pretty easy. But now let's say I want to create a resource group. Well, for create in PowerShell, you use new. So I would say new because I want a new resource group. And I can autocomplete that again. Oh, I forgot the AZ. See, it didn't autocomplete because I was wrong. AZ resource here. And make group. All right, I have AZ resource group. And now this one needs parameters. And I can take a guess of what they should be, but there's an easier way. I put a dash in here and I press tab. And it autocompletes to the first parameter that is needed for that Azure resource group. It first needs a name. So I will name this example. And I can do the same thing again. So I press dash, tab again, and it's going to need a location. So I set the location in Azure where I want it to be. Now, this can actually autocomplete as well, but it doesn't always work, or I'm just not patient enough. But let's say I want to use West Europe. So WE, and I press tab. There we go. Press tab again because the first one was in the US and I wanted it in Europe. And there we go. Now I have that location. So I can now click enter. And now my research group has been created. So this was pretty neat. And of course, I know that these are all the parameters that have to be used because I use this commandlet pretty often. But if I have a completely new commandlet and I want to know what parameters I need to fill in, oh, I went too quickly. I will just press enter at this point and it will ask me for all the parameters that are actually mandatory. So this can help you get track of what that commandlet does. And now the other thing that I want to do is I want to create a storage account. And a little spoiler alert, we're going to create a lot of storage accounts today. The reason for that is that they do not require a lot of parameters and they are pretty quick to deploy. So I would guess the commandlet would be new AZ storage account. And I auto-completed too early. It's always alphabetical. So let's see with store, and it's a storage account. Now, another thing that I can do is use get help here. If I add get help at the front of the commandlet, takes some time, but it shows me some information on this commandlet. What it's called, what it does, and what syntax I need to use. So this can help you out. You can also find this on the Microsoft documentation on the browser. And I always like to just type along and see what happens, but that's not really how you get the best quality. The best quality you get if you actually know what you're doing, but I really like to play along. So what I would do is say create a new AZ storage account. And I start tapping again. So I put a dash in there, push tab, and the first thing that it needs to know is the resource group name. So the resource group was called example. I just created that. And I press dash again. And I need to define the storage account name. Now that's the only downside with a storage account is the naming convention of a storage account. You can also only use lowercase letters and numbers, nothing else. And it needs to be globally unique and it has to be less than 24 characters. And this is a bit of a pain if you have a nice naming convention going on and then you have to create a storage account. But anyway, my favorite method of getting a unique name. Need to get that one out there, but I think this should be fine. So I press dash again, and one thing I need to add is that SKU name. And to know what SKU names it would accept, I can look over here and I find the SKU name. And after that are all the accepted values. So I know I can use any of these. But there's actually also an autocomplete on there. So if I do a space now and press tab, it will run through all these options, which makes life a bit easier. So I'm going to select this one because it's the cheapest. And if I would use dash again and walk around, you can see I have a lot of different things I can still add on. There are a lot of settings with the storage account, but they are not needed, so I'm not going to do them. I think all I need to add is the location I can press enter and this will start deploying the storage account for me, if this is in fact a unique name, which I did an assumption it is. This all works, by the way, in PowerShell 7, in PowerShell 5.1 as well, every different kind of PowerShell. And now my storage account has been created. So let's see if I can find it here. And I always like to play the game to see if I can, yeah, let's not do that. There's a little game to see if I can beat the portal, but I just got down a bit. Yeah, I beat the portal. The portal isn't actually that fast, and sometimes I need to do some refreshes to actually get my storage account. There it is. One of my favorite games. I beat the portal. So here is that storage account, and here I can find all the settings that were there. And I can see settings, for example, in configuration, you have a lot of settings, and I can look at those settings and think about what kind of parameter would actually be fitting for that specific setting. So here I see, for example, an access tier. And let's see, because I'm not actually sure. So I did it again. Access tier is actually parameter. So you can find your way around that a bit by comparing the settings in the portal and thinking about how would you describe them in one word, because often that's just the case. Now, with this, you can create scripts to deploy complete environments if you want to. And this is, for example, pretty basic scripts that deploys a virtual machine with everything that the virtual machine needs. So a resource group, a network configuration, a virtual network, public IP, all the stuff. And this would deploy a virtual machine for me. And it can be tricky to not get lost in what is actually happening, because this is a lot of code for basically a virtual machine. What if I'm creating 5 virtual machines in 2 different virtual networks? It might get complicated to see what's actually going on. And at that point, I recommend going to the portal, looking for that resource, and finding out how it is structured. And one way you can do that, because this is the resource group that was created. So here you see the virtual machine, public IP, and all the goods. And so this already helps. I can get a clear overview of what has been created. But if you go to VNet, and here you have the option diagram. So this can help you with your specifically infrastructure as a service, can really help you out. And here I can get an overview of that virtual network. Now, this example is pretty boring because there's only one network interface card and one virtual machine. But you can imagine if you have multiple subnets and multiple VMs going on, this can come in pretty handy to virtualize stuff. And maybe even add it to your documentation, so you do not need to do this all manually. So that's a bit on PowerShell and what PowerShell can do for you. Now let's real quickly move on to the Azure CLI. Azure CLI is based on a Bash infrastructure, and if you have a Linux background, you will probably like a CLI, the AZ CLI, a lot more than PowerShell. Although they can all exist next to each other, and all of them work on Windows as well as Linux as well as a Mac interface. So here I can just press AZ and it loads up that AZ CLI for me. And the first thing is all the categories that I can use. And again, this should look a bit familiar. If you consider all those Azure categories, this is a bit like that. Not completely consistent like the PowerShell categories, but here you can actually use them to get to your resource that you wanted. So let's say I wanted to view those resource groups as I did before. My first instinct would be to go to resource group because I'm very used to PowerShell. And it's not actually here. It comes from resource to rest. So that takes a bit of thinking for me. And no, this is all a bit shorter. My second guess would be group. And here we can actually find it. Now, one thing that I really like about the AZ CLI is that you have -H. And -H can help you find a complete path through the tool. So I said I wanted to use AZ group, and I have no clue what to do. So I said -H, and it shows me all the command lists that I can use. There's a subgroup for logs, but I don't care about that. And here I have commands that are a lot like those verbs that we just talked about. So create, delete, list. Of course, they are all saying the same thing, but with a different word. That's just to keep ourselves awake and to make it all a little bit challenging. But this can help you with finding out what do I want to do. So for example, I want to list all those resource group I have available. I did a set group list, and I get an overview of those same resource groups. The overview in this case is in JSON, where last time we got the results in PowerShell objects. So we want to create a group like we did before. And AZ, actually, this is kind of new, but I can actually just run AZ group. And it will say, yeah, that's not going to work. Maybe you meant this. So this is also pretty nice. And if you think to yourself, was this -H? What letter was it? It also tells you you can use --help, which is the same as -H. So I think that's pretty nice for the usability. Now I'm gonna set that H again because I wanted to create a group, and it says here AZ group create should help me out. And I'm completely lost again on what to do. So I said -H again. And I get all the parameters or arguments that I can use with this one. So here I can see I can add location and name and manage by and tags. And it even shows me which of these are required. So that works. And underneath that is my favorite thing, an example, which actually shows you how you can use them. So with that example, now I'm going to click create, and L was for location, and I'll put West Europe, and N was for name, and this would be example 2. Already had example 1. So there I have created that resource group again. All right. Now let's move on to that storage account. If I press AZ again to see all the categories, I find here that I can use storage. All right, so I do the same thing, storage -H. And here it actually has a lot of subgroups, a lot of different things I can use, but the account is right at the top. This is why you always choose an example that's alphabetically at the top. So here I can manage storage account, which I wanted to do. So let's see, AZ storage account, and that -H again. Manage storage account. And here are some commands that I can do with it. And this one's actually pretty nice. I can check if that name is valid and if it's not already in use. So if I would say storage account, let me just, yeah, it was this, check name. So if I put this in, fill. Oh, I forgot an argument there. And here you see again, it tells me maybe you wanted to do this. So this can really help out if you are just starting out. I have to define that name and do it like that. And here it says name available false because it's not a valid storage account name. So nice, good to know. And I can actually check typing is hard, name another beauty, and see if this is actually available. And it says the message is fine and the name is at this point available. So let's create that storage account now. And that would be create, and I'm gonna do -h again to see what arguments it needs. And see, a storage account has a lot of settings, a lot of different options. So it's a long list, but it also tells me hey, only these two are required. Don't worry. You have to press the name and the resource group. And I suspect in the end here we have some examples. So I can use those storage account create. Set it a name. Of course, I do not remember what I put before, so let's hope this is free as well. And the G for the resource group, that was example 2. And I think that was it, that I could do it like this. And it will start deploying. Now, as you might see by the way I'm running things, I actually do not use the AZ CLI that often. I actually find my way around it this way. So I think for usability, that really helps that you have got that extensive categories in there which you can work with. And it has now created that storage account. And let's see if we can find it. And I beat the portal again. Getting faster and faster. So here we have that storage account running. You can combine these two resources together. So the AZ and the PowerShell, you can run them through each other. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to do it, but it is possible to do one thing with PowerShell and the next thing with AZ and mix them all up. So that's the AZ CLI. And yeah. One thing I can't do is do this talk about how the portal can help you and not mention the Cloud Shell. In the Cloud Shell, all these tools come together right here in the portal. In the portal, you find this button, Cloud Shell. I will click it and it will start down here. You can also reach just the Cloud Shell by using shell.azure.com. Or you can combine them and you can drag this a bit around and still keep using the portal next to it, which is kind of impossible because I'm running at a very, I'm zoomed in a bit because I assume everyone might have some trouble seeing the small letters. So I always do that. And here I can use the AZ module. I can use PowerShell. I can actually use other tools as well. I can use Terraform, for example, or Puppet. I can also use Git. So the Git is loaded in here, so I can clone a GitHub Git repository here to look at some Git, because this is just a file system that is actually you are able to use. So this is all still in the browser. Let me just make it a bit larger. Because the coolest thing I have available here, no, this is code, Visual Studio Code interface, which I can use. So I can write a script here and do all the things with that, and then say I want to save it, call it example 5 I'm at now, did a lot of preparation, and save that, and I can close that editor, and now I can just autocomplete. Oh, too much. That will teach me. And run that hello world script here. So a pretty good experience. You can do a lot of things here, and I find this very handy for something I do want to do quickly. You do not have to authenticate because you're already authenticated through the portal. So if I really need to quickly get something, I always use the Cloud Shell. There is one other use case of the Cloud Shell, and I actually did that. This is me running PowerShell on an iPad. And yes, I bought that crappy little keyboard specifically for this project. And no, I have never once used it after I had set this up and made this photo and made a blog post. This is a nice little gimmick. And yeah, the best reason I did it is I was on a holiday and I didn't have a laptop and I was bored. So what you gonna do? And my dog is in the background and I know he's judging me, and he should. But it is pretty cool that it's available, that you can run PowerShell directly on the portal or in the Cloud Shell from an iPad. I mean, the technology is cool. So let's go back to the ARM templates. ARM templates are the first time we're going to talk declarative infrastructure as code. You're going to describe what you expect to happen at the end, and you do not bother with the process to get you there. ARM templates are written in a JSON structure, and this is really a basic overview of all the components of that JSON. Where you get a schema and a content version, but basically you get parameters, variables, resources, and outputs. Where resources are the most important one. This is where you describe everything that every resource that you want to deploy to Azure at this point. So you make a description of all these resources, and I'm gonna show you what that look like. And here we have, of course, surprise, surprise, a storage account. And here you can see my value resources and the storage account that I created. And would you look at that? There are those categories again. So again, this can help you structure what resources you are creating and getting an overview. I can see instantly that this is a storage resource. If I create a virtual machine, the type will be Microsoft.compute/virtual machine, for example. And after that, what you see again is the name, the location, and the SKU. So this is a lot like we did it in all the other interfaces where you could set those parameters for you. The only changes I made is that the location and the SKU come from parameters and the name comes from a variable. The parameters here, what I actually did for the storage account name, you define a bit of a prefix. And after that, I have a variable which takes that prefix and adds a unique string to that. So I always know it's a unique name. I do not have to worry about this. By the way, if I would put this in production, I would set a maximum length here because the storage account count can only be 24 letters, 24 characters. But this is nice to help you out. So this would deploy that storage account. And 1 second, I forgot to plug in my laptop. Now I can never tell that the desk here is clean or something like that, or that it's not messy here, not at all. Anyway, panic over. So here I have that ARM template for that storage account. Let's say I want to deploy that. There are different ways to do that. I can do that through PowerShell to the Azure CLI. I can do it in the portal. I can do it in Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions. A lot of different options, but we're going to use PowerShell for here. And to use that, I do new AZ resource group deployment. And apparently it's still loading. Not sure why autocomplete isn't working, but it's Might be because, oh, there it is. Did some testing before, so I'm in the wrong PowerShell setting. Did some testing on a 5.1, and on 5.1 I do not have the AZ module loaded because I mostly use PowerShell 7. So let's move back here. New AZ resource group deployment. And here, if I actually do that autocomplete thing, it asks me for the resource group that I want to use. And did I create an example 3 yet? Let's just put this in example 2. And it asks for a name, but I do not actually have to mention a name. There are a lot of parameters on this commandlet, so it's better to just know which one you want to use. I want to use template file to define the ARM template. And I could use a file to define the parameters that I want to use, or I could put them in an object. But in this case, I only need to add one parameters because the other one has a default one. And I can use it right here. So the storage account prefix, I can use it right here. So let's just set a basic value because it's going to add on to that itself. And from here, it's going to start the deployment. It's only going to be ready when the complete deployment is ready. So if you're running large ARM templates, I would recommend using a verbose tag so you can actually see that it's still doing stuff. Because it can take some time before it's ready, especially if you have DSC on a virtual machine, for example. But here we have another deployment, and it should be in here. Portal's really slow today. I get to win all the time. Maybe they're just doing it to make me happy. So here I have deployed that storage account. Now what we just saw, that ARM template, that was pretty basic storage account with all the default settings and nothing really special going on. But let's say I have a storage account like this one and I have some special needs for it. I want a cool access tier, and I'm just gonna flip some of these switches randomly. And I save that. And now they tell me, hey, this is what we want for a storage account, and we need to automate this. So you put it in a template, please. Now I could just use the documentation. Documentation on ARM templates is very extensive, and it's all descriptive, and you can all see what's going on and what you would need to get these results. But the portal can also help you out. So let's say this is exactly what I want to have. Then every resource in Azure has a little button, export template. So I can click here and I'll copy and paste this code real quickly because it's not really readable in the portal. So I'll put it here. And it has generated a complete template for me. Now these templates are generated and they are pretty messy. They are really not production ready when they come from the portal. As you can see, this parameter does not make any sense at all, for example. But what I do like to do is look at these settings to find those specific options that I need. So here I can see that access tier, cool. So I know now this is how I would define the access tool. The access tier. And here I can find, apparently I did some things with encryption. I really did not watch what switches I changed, but I can copy and paste this to get the same results and use that in my own ARM template that's already cleaned up. So this can really help with those obscure settings where you're thinking, where is this defined? You can find them this way. So that's one way where the portal can really help with those settings. And if you want to take it a little further, for example, let's go to that resource group where we had a few different resources. Let's say I want to create a copy of this resource group. actually, the resource group has an export template function as well. So I could go to this. And here I have all the different resources. So I have the virtual network here, and the virtual machine, and the subnets. So like I said, not production ready. There's a lot going on, but this can really help you out with setting it up to see what is going on and make it your own, make your own ARM templates. And there's one other cool thing that I want to show, because there's a downside to this, and that is that I need to deploy those resources before I can create this template. Which some resources take long to deploy, or they cost a lot of money, or they interact with other resources, so you do not want to deploy them. It's not always handy, but there is actually another option. Let's go to our favorite resources again, the storage account. Let's say I want to create a new one. And it's going in example 2 again. And I'm so waiting for this one to go wrong, for me to type something and it to say this already exists. And I wanted to change some settings. And sure. So I changed some settings here and there. And when I go to review and create, I have the option download a template for automation. And I'm not completely sure how it works, but these are actually pretty clean. It's pretty impressive how clean they are. So if I look at this, it has some clean parameters and all those settings I just defined. The only thing that I would consider in this case, for example, is that it really created a parameter for everything. And I'm not sure if I need that much flexibility. So that helps you to look at your use case. Something like support HTTP traffic only, HTTPS traffic only. If that is a standard for your environment, then you do not need a parameter for that, and you can just set that to true. Or you can make the decision to create more than one template for your environment. But here you can make the decision if some of these could just be hard-coded. But a really cool feature from the portal that you can just get all that information like that. So that's it for the ARM templates. I want to show you some sources that you can use. The one on top is a GitHub repository where all the scripts I used and all the templates I used and this PowerShell presentation is available to you. So it's on my GitHub, and then AA make the portal work for you. I have also linked the Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI GitHub repositories where you can file issues if you have some problems or get some examples. I have also included documentation of the Azure REST API, which we didn't have time for in this talk because it would take a lot more, but everything that you cannot do with PowerShell or the AZ CLI, you can do with the REST API if it's something you're looking for. And one that I do want to mention, because it needs to be mentioned when it comes to ARM templates, is the ARM template Visual Studio Code extension. This extension is incredible for authoring ARM templates. It can basically create them for you to the point where you think you are making this too easy. Anyone can do my job. Really, it's an amazing tool to use. So I wanted to mention that one as well if you're working with ARM templates. So that brings me to the end. I've linked the GitHub once again here, and my blog again, and my Twitter account. If you at one point next week think I had a question, you can hit me up on Twitter. Let me know. And yeah, that's it for me. I don't know if there are any questions at this point.
Barbara, yeah. So we've got a question from Wesley. Wesley, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on Project Bicep.
Hey, Wesley.
Good evening.
I have not been playing around with Bicep too much yet. I have been playing around with some, and it's promising. It looks nice, but I actually am a big fan of JSON as a format. And I know it's made for computers, and I'm not sure if I should be worried, but I love JSON. And so there's not that much that it adds to me. I'm very happy that they promised that ARM templates would be still existing. So I'm still looking for the use case for me as someone who likes JSON. I do think it's promising, and I'm very curious how it's gonna find its way between ARM templates and Terraform, because they are a lot alike. And one thing I must say about JSON, I always, in my ARM templates, if they get complicated, I always make comments in them which say what resource is actually beneath it. Because if you fold them all in, you can't see where each resource is. So that's one thing where Bicep would work better. But then again, you can do comments in JSON now. So
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Bicep is promising, but I think for most people who will be working with ARM templates, that will probably still be the way to go for them. I'm actually hoping for some kind of packaging mechanism like Terraform provides, and if that will be added to Bicep, then that will make me really happy.
and I know a lot of people are not a fan of JSON and ARM templates as a whole. So I do think it's a good move that they started working with this.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I think I had one other question. Let me just find it. Ellis Gary was asking, does Bash do something that PowerShell can't, or is it just good to learn something new?
I think they do pretty much the same. I don't think there's too much difference between what the one can do and can't do. If anyone knows of examples, let them know. I think they do pretty much the same. And what I really see is, because I find PowerShell really intuitive, because I've been working for years with PowerShell. But if I call PowerShell intuitive, often there are a lot of Linux people saying PowerShell is not intuitive at all. AZCLI is intuitive. So I think it's a good move that they made them both available and both able to do everything to get everyone connected to that Azure automation.
So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I wanted to quickly mention that we are having a December virtual meetup, and we are having Donovan Brown, which Tricia obviously quoted earlier on in our session. He's going to come along and do a session. I haven't fleshed out what we're actually doing. I'm not sure if he's doing can ask me anything, or if he's going to do a presentation. There's a lot of talk. I can change it up. If you want to do an AMA with Donovan, I can absolutely do that. If you want to hear him talk about something, let me know. Absolutely can do either of those. I could probably rope in Abel Wang as well if we wanted to do the AMA. Potentially, I'm volunteering Abel, but both Donovan's my skip ahead manager and Abel's also in my team, so I'm totally leveraging my connections and my leadership team. So I've dropped in the link to sign up for the more details about the event. But like I said, if there's something you want to hear from Donovan, let me know and we can sort that out as well. So that's me. Sorry, Gregor, I've kind of taken over.
No, feel free. I just wanted to say thanks everyone for taking part and coming, and hope to see you at the December event. Yeah, thanks again. Hope you enjoyed it.
Fun. Thank you.
Yeah, let us know. Drop us some feedback on the Twitter or Facebook account. That'd be great.
Yes, awesome.